My name is Glenn Russell, and for almost 2 years I worked on an oil platform in the North Sea. The platform was called Presidium 4, though most of the crew just called it P4. It sat roughly 120 miles east of Aberdeen, far enough out that land stopped feeling real after your first day aboard. Everything around us was gray water, gray sky, steel railings, yellow cranes, red warning lights, and the constant vibration of machinery moving beneath your boots. I liked it out there immediately. Most people hated the rotation. They hated the helicopter ride, the isolation, the weather, the lack of normal life, the way the whole platform groaned during rough seas. I understood that, but it never bothered me much. I liked having a job where the rules were clear. I liked knowing where I had to be, what I had to check, what tools I needed, and what happened if someone got careless. Offshore work did not reward imagination. It rewarded attention, patience, and doing things the same right way every single time. I like that. I'd worked mechanical maintenance before I got hired by Presidium Energy. Nothing glamorous. Pump stations, refinery equipment, conveyor systems, hydraulic lines, valves, gearboxes, anything with pressure, heat, movement, or enough weight to kill a man if he put his hand in the wrong place. The offshore job paid better, but that wasn't the only reason I took it. I like the idea of being somewhere removed from everything. No traffic, no stupid errands, no people dropping by. No nonsense. Just 12-hour shifts, bad coffee, cold wind, and a bunk waiting when the day was done. Presidium 4 was not a pretty platform. Looked like a rusted industrial city built on stilts and dropped into the sea by mistake. The lower levels were stained white and brown from salt and weather. The walkways were grated metal, slick most mornings, with handrails that felt cold even through gloves. Chains hung from hoist above open service bays. Cables ran along the walls in black bundles. Pipes sweated constantly. Warning signs covered every hatch and ladder. Some were official, some were handwritten. The first time I saw it from the helicopter, I remember thinking it looked too heavy to float and too delicate to survive the water underneath it. The helicopter landed hard on the helideck, bounced once, then settled. The rotors kept screaming while we climbed out one by one with our bags tucked tight against our bodies. The wind hit me first. Not just a breeze, but a hard, steady shove that pushed salt into my mouth and made my eyes water. A safety officer in an orange jacket waved us forward, head down, one hand raised, leading us off the deck and through a yellow door into the platform. Inside, the noise changed. Outside was wind and rotors. Inside was metal. Fans, pumps, generators. Footsteps on grating, radios cracking, distant hammering, the low continuous rumble of equipment running below you. You felt it through your boots before you learned to hear it. After a week, the platform had its own sounds. After a month, you could tell when something was wrong before anyone said a word. There were 27 of us on rotation when I arrived. Not a skeleton crew, not a little group of doomed men sitting around waiting to be picked off. 27 workers, all with jobs, shifts, lockers, bunks, bad habits, and opinions they kept mostly to themselves. There were drill crew, crane operators, electricians, mechanics, welders, medics, cooks, safety officers, and radio personnel. Some had been offshore for 20 years. Some were new enough to still overpack. My immediate supervisor was Frank Daniels, a maintenance lead from Hull with a shaved head, thick wrist, and the posture of a man who had spent half his life ducking through low steel doorways. Frank was not warm, but he was fair. And out there, fair mattered more than friendly. He walked me through the maintenance level on my first afternoon, showing me the pump room, the tool cages, the service lockers, the emergency stations, and the access ladders leaning down toward the lower platforms. He did not give speeches. He pointed to things and told me what would kill me. "That valve opens hot," he said. "That hatch stays like that unless control says otherwise. Never step backward near a moon pool. Don't trust a dry railing, salt dries real fast. That was how the first few hours went. He showed me the machinery, the escape routes, the muster points, the eye stations, the shut-off panels, and the places where the floor dropped away into open sea. I paid attention because it felt practical. Men died offshore because they got tired, lazy, proud, or distracted. That much made sense to me. What did not make sense were the bells. I noticed the first one near the western walkway, mounted to a steel post beside a red emergency box. It was an old brass bell, big enough to belong on a ship, with a rope hanging from the clapper. Looked polished, too polished for the rest of the platform. A few minutes later, I saw another near the crane deck, then another near the stairs that led down toward the lower maintenance level. They were not connected to the alarm system. They were not electric. They were just bells, bolted into place at different points around the rig. I asked Frank what they were for. He looked at the bell, then back at me. "You'll be told." That was the first answer I got about anything unusual on P4, and it turned out to be the most common answer too. "You'll be told." "Not yet. Don't worry about it till you need to." The crew had a strange way of separating normal danger from the other kind. They would argue about equipment, weather delays, shift assignments, food, sleep, and broken parts like any other crew. But certain subjects shut conversations down immediately. The bells, the company life jackets, the green Tic Tacs everyone carried, the 6-digit codes that were written nowhere but treated like emergency protocol. The water itself. Especially the water. Men looked at it often. A crane operator named Patrick Lewis would pause before crossing the eastern catwalk and glance down through the grating. One of the cooks, Albert Hayes, refused to stand near the railing during his smoke breaks. Frank never turned his back to the sea when we were on the lower platforms, even if he was talking to me. He always angled himself so he could see it. On my second night aboard, I stood outside after shift and watched the water below the rig. It was darker than I expected. The platform lights struck the surface in broken yellow strips, but beneath that, there was nothing. No bottom, no shape, just black water moving between the support legs. Every few seconds, a wave hit the steel hard enough to send spray up through the grating. The whole structure answered with a dull metallic sound that traveled through the columns and into my feet. I like the ocean during the day. At night, I understood why nobody cursed it. Frank found me there after maybe 5 minutes. He did not tell me to go inside right away. He stood beside me, rested both hands on the railing, and looked down at the water with the same expression he used when inspecting worn bearings. "First rotation?" "Offshore, yes," I said. He nodded. "You like it so far?" "I do." Good, he began. "That helps. Men who hate it out here, they make mistakes." I thought he meant practical mistakes. Missed checks, loose bolts, bad rigging, failure to lock out a system before putting hands on it. And then Frank reached into his jacket pocket, and he pulled out a folded piece of laminated paper. It was old, creased at the corners, and worn cloudy along the fold. He handed it to me without looking away from the water. "You keep this in your locker. Read it tonight. Memorize it before morning." I unfolded it under the deck light. There were 6 rules printed on it in plain black letters. No title, no company logo, just 6 rules. Rule 1. Do not go into the water unless absolutely necessary. Now, the North Sea is not empty water. It looks flat from above when the wind dies down, but that surface is a lie. Beneath it, the temperature drops fast, the light disappears even faster, and the depth becomes something you stop thinking about because there is no useful way to measure it with your eyes. You can stand on a platform 100 feet above the surface and still have no sense of where anything ends. The first explanation I got was the one you'd expect. Sharks? Not the kind people picture from documentaries, circling in clear blue water with sunlight cutting through the surface. The water out there is dark, cold, and thick with silt and debris. Visibility is low even on a calm day, and at depth it drops to nothing. Anything moving down there is moving blind or close to it, and that makes them direct. The most common species in that region are porbeagle sharks, which look close enough to great whites that you don't get to be corrected if you mistake one for the other. They're fast, powerful, and perfectly comfortable in cold water. There are also Greenland sharks, which are harder to explain to people because they don't behave the way you expect a predator to behave. They move slowly. They live deep. Some of them are estimated to be over 200 years old. When they come up, it's not dramatic. It's not a burst of speed. It's a presence. Frank told me that part like he was describing a machine. They don't rush you. You won't see a charge. You won't see a fin. If one of those is there, it's already under you. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was telling me what to expect. We had a briefing on it during my first week. Safety officer went over standard protocol. Harnesses, tethers, spotters. No lone work near open edges. Emergency ladders marked and checked. Life rings positioned at intervals. Radios tested before any job near the perimeter. It was all normal offshore procedure, the same kind of layered redundancy you see anywhere something heavy and dangerous is moving around. What stuck with me wasn't the procedure. It was the way nobody joked during that part of the briefing. Men who would argue about everything else kept quiet when the topic was the water. Focused. I saw why about 9 days into my first rotation. We were working the lower maintenance level on the eastern side of the rig. The sea was calm for once, just a steady roll, nothing violent. The kind of day where the platform felt stable enough that you forgot how much of it was suspended above open water. We had a 3-man team checking a series of valves along the outer piping. Frank was supervising. I was logging readings. The third man was a welder named Jason Cole, mid-30s, solid worker, quiet, kept his tools in order and his mouth mostly shut. Well, he was leaning out over a section of pipe, checking a joint when it happened. There was no shout or dramatic slip. His boot lost purchase on the wet metal, and his weight shifted just enough that the harness line went slack instead of catching him. 1 second he was there, one hand on the pipe, the other holding his gauge. The next second he was gone. We heard the impact, but it wasn't loud. The water absorbed it. A dull sound, like something heavy dropped into wet sand. Frank was already moving by the time I turned. He hit the radio, called it in, and pointed me to the nearest ring without breaking stride. "Eyes on him," he said. I got to the railing and looked down. For a second I didn't see anything. The surface was broken by the platform legs, shadowed in places where the light didn't reach. Then I saw movement about 10 feet out from the structure. Jason came up once. Not fully, just enough that his shoulders broke the surface. He wasn't thrashing, that's the part people get wrong. He didn't look like a man fighting. He looked like someone trying to get his bearings, like he didn't understand how far he'd fallen. I grabbed the life ring, and I threw it as far as I could. The life ring hit the water a few feet short of him and drifted closer. Frank was shouting into the radio behind me, calling for standby crew, ladder access, anything we could get down to him fast. Another worker ran up with a second line. Someone else was already moving toward the emergency ladder. Jason reached for the ring. His hand got within inches of it. And then the water under him changed. Didn't explode. Didn't churn like in a movie. It tightened. That's the only word I can use for it. The surface, it pulled inward, like something had displaced it from below. And Jason dropped out of sight in a single motion that didn't match the waves around him. The ring bobbed once, and then something hit it from beneath. Not a bite I could see, not a shape I could track, just a sudden force that knocked it sideways hard enough to send a sheet of water up against the platform leg. For a moment, the water around that spot darkened, and I thought it was a shadow until I realized it was blood dispersing. It spread slower than I expected. Thicker. There was no second surface, no struggle, no body coming back up. Frank stopped talking mid-sentence on the radio and stared down at the water for a full second before finishing his call. Man overboard. No recovery. The rest of the crew arrived within a minute, but it was already done. We stood there scanning the surface, like we might have missed something, like there was still a chance to see him again. Nobody said the word shark, not right away. Later in the mess, someone asked Frank what he thought took him. Poor Beagle, he said. Maybe more than one. He didn't elaborate. That night, I went back out to the same spot after shift. The water looked exactly the same as it had before. Same slow movement, same dark surface, same sound against the steel. If you didn't know what had happened there, you would have had no reason to think anything was different. There was no sign, no warning, no pattern you could read from above. Over the next few weeks, I heard other stories, not all from our platform, some from other rigs, other crews and rotations. A man in a survival suit pulled under while waiting for a rescue basket, a diver who signaled distress and then vanished mid-line. A body recovered days later with damage that didn't match propellers or equipment. One of the older mechanics, Brian Sullivan, told me about Greenland sharks during a late shift when we were waiting on a pressure test to finish. Yeah, they don't move fast, he said. That's what makes them worse. You think you'd see them coming, you think you'd have time. But they don't need speed, they wait. They rise. And by the time you notice anything, you're already inside their space. He said some of them live longer than any man out there. Long enough to learn patterns. Long enough to learn where food falls. He tapped the railing with his knuckle when he said that. Things fall from rigs. More often than they should. After that, the rule stopped feeling like standard safety language. Wasn't about drowning. Wasn't just about cold shock or currents or impact injuries. It was about entering something that already had an order to it. One that did not include you. By the end of my first rotation, I understood why they said it twice. Not because it was complicated. Because once you saw what happened when someone ignored it, you didn't need it explained again. Out there, the water does not give you a second chance. Rule 2. Never curse the ocean. This came up the same way most things did out there. By accident. In the middle of something normal, when someone said the wrong thing and everyone else reacted before I understood why. It happened in the galley about 2 weeks into my rotation. We'd just come off a long shift. Wind had picked up that afternoon and stayed steady into the night, rattling the outer panels and pushing spray up against the lower levels hard enough that the whole structure carried a constant low vibration. Not dangerous weather, but enough to wear on you if you were already tired. There were maybe 8 of us sitting at the tables, eating whatever they'd put out. Rice, chicken, something overcooked and heavy that filled you up without tasting like much. The TV was on in the corner, muted, cycling through news footage nobody was watching. Most conversations were short, practical, nothing that lasted longer than a few sentences. A guy named Kevin Turner sat across from me. He'd been offshore longer than I had, maybe 5 or 6 years. Solid worker, loud when he talked, but not in an annoying way. The kind of guy who filled silence when nobody else felt like it. He pushed his tray away, leaned back in his chair, and looked toward the windows. Outside, the water was dark and uneven, catching light from the platform in broken strips. I hate this ocean. The reaction was immediate. Final. Frank stopped eating. Brian Sullivan set his fork down without finishing his bite. Someone at the far end of the table actually turned in his seat to look at Kevin like he hadn't heard him correctly. Kevin noticed. "What, you don't?" Nobody answered him right away. Frank wiped his hands on a napkin, stood up, and walked over to Kevin's side of the table. "Do not say that again," Frank said. Kevin gave a small laugh, like he thought it was a joke. "I am serious. Do not say it." Kevin held his hands up a little. "All right, relax, man, it's just water." Frank didn't respond to that. He just stood there for a second longer, making sure Kevin was looking at him, then went back to his seat. The conversation didn't recover after that. People finished eating and left in ones and twos. Nobody brought it up again. Kevin didn't apologize, but he didn't repeat it either. The rest of the night went on like nothing had happened, but there was a gap in it. Something different. I didn't think much of it until the next morning. Kevin didn't show up for shift. That happens sometimes. Guys overslept, alarms got missed. You'd knock on their bunk door, wake them up, give them a hard time about it later. Wasn't a big deal. Except nobody had knocked. When Frank checked the bunk room, Kevin's bed was empty. Not made, not stripped, just empty. His boots were still there, placed neatly under the frame the way everyone kept them. His locker was closed. Nothing looked disturbed, no signs of a rush. No sign he'd packed anything or gone anywhere with intention. Just gone. Well, they did a full search of the platform. Every ladder and access point. Every storage room, ladder, maintenance space, and exterior walkway. Radio stayed active the entire time. The crane operator swept the perimeter with the lights. 2 men checked the emergency ladders that ran down toward the lower structure, and nothing. Nobody had seen him leave. No one had heard anything during the night. There were no alarms or reports, no sign of a fall. By mid-morning, the tone had shifted. Not panic or confusion, acceptance. Frank gathered a few of us near the maintenance level and went over what we were going to report. Missing worker. Last seen in the galley the night before. No known reason for departure. No evidence of accident on platform. I asked him if they thought Kevin had gone over the side. Frank looked at me for a second before answering. If he did, someone would have heard it. He didn't say anything else. The search ended before lunch. The rest of the day continued like normal. Tasks got assigned, equipment got checked, logs got filled out, radio stayed on, and nobody stopped working. That night, nobody sat at Kevin's spot in the galley. And 2 days later, we found something. One of the crane operators spotted it first, floating out past the eastern side, maybe 30 yards off the platform. They brought it in with a hook line. It was a shirt. Just a standard offshore work shirt, salt stiffened and heavy with water. And inside the collar was Kevin's name. Nothing else came up that day or the day after. A week later, a supply vessel reported debris about 5 miles south of our position. They logged it and moved on. We got the report through standard channels, same as anything else that might affect operations. The description was short. Clothing, partial remains, recovered by another vessel. No further details. Frank did not read that report out loud, but word moved through the crew anyway, it always did. Nobody said Kevin's name when they talked about it. Nobody connected it back to the galley. But after that, nobody spoke against the ocean either. Not in frustration, not in passing, not even under their breath. You could complain about the cold, the wind, the shifts, the food, the noise, the sleep. You could complain about anything that existed on the platform. But not the water. I heard another story a few rotations later. Different rig and crew. A man got caught out during a storm, stuck on an exterior walkway longer than he should have been. Wind was high enough to make standing difficult. Spray coming over the side in sheets. He got back inside eventually, soaked through, angry, shaken from the cold. He said something about the ocean trying to kill him. Not a long speech, just a sentence. And he didn't show up the next morning. Same pattern. Boots left behind, locker untouched, search turned up nothing. 3 days later, something was found drifting. Not a body, a hand, still inside a glove. No clean explanation for how it separated. No sign of anything else nearby. Now, I don't know if those stories are all true. Out there, stories change depending on who tells them, how long they've been working, and what they've seen. Details get lost, timelines shift, names get left out. But the pattern doesn't change. Someone speaks against the ocean, and then they're gone. Nobody on P4 ever tried to test it, not after Kevin. It wasn't about believing in anything specific. Nobody stood around talking about gods or curses or anything like that. Nobody prayed to the water, or made offerings, or tried to explain it in a way that made sense. They just followed the rule. Because every time it had been ignored, the result had been the same. Rule 3. If you see the most beautiful woman you've ever seen, ring the bells. The bells are mounted all over the platform. You notice them early, even if nobody points them out. Brass, polished, heavy, each one fixed to a post or railing with a length of rope tied to the clapper. They're placed where people work, near the crane deck, along the outer walkways, beside the lower maintenance stairs, near the helideck access. Not decorative, not connected to any electrical system, just there. They don't look like emergency equipment, but everyone knows exactly where the nearest one is. By the time I saw my first siren, I already knew what the bells were for. Not because anyone sat me down and explained it, but because I'd heard enough fragments from different people to piece it together. Words like, don't hesitate, don't look too long, ring it, even if you're not sure. It didn't sound like something I would need until I did. It happened late in the afternoon, about 3 weeks into my second rotation. The weather had settled into something steady that day. Low wind, long swells, the kind of gray light that flattens everything and makes distance harder to judge. I was working the western walkway, logging readings off a set of pressure lines that ran along the outer structure. It was routine work. Move station to station, check the gauges, write it down, move on. There were 2 other men on that side with me. Patrick Lewis on the crane above, and a technician named Daniel Johnson checking a panel further down the line. We weren't talking. Nobody talks much during that kind of work. You just stay aware of where the others are and keep moving. I remember finishing one reading and stepping forward to the next point when I saw her. She was standing on the lower platform. Not far out, maybe 15 feet below me, on a section of steel that connected one of the support legs to the outer frame. It wasn't a place anyone would stand without a harness, not a place anyone would just appear. She wasn't holding on to anything. She wasn't braced against the wind. She was just standing there, facing away from me, looking out at the water. For a moment, I thought someone had come down from another level and I hadn't noticed. That happens sometimes. People move around the rig more than you expect, and if you're focused on your work, you don't always track every movement. But then I noticed what she was wearing. It wasn't right. No high-vis gear, no jacket, no helmet, no harness. Just a long, light-colored dress that moved slightly in the wind, but didn't react the way fabric should out there. It didn't snap or whip, it just shifted slowly, like it was underwater instead of in open air. I leaned on the railing and looked down at her, trying to figure out how she'd gotten there. And that was when she turned. There's no good way to describe it without making it sound exaggerated. She was just perfect. Not in a strange way, not glowing, not distorted. Nothing about her face looked unnatural. If anything, that was the problem. She looked completely normal. Clear skin, calm expression, eyes fixed on me, like she'd already been expecting me to look down. And for a second, everything else faded. The noise of the platform dropped back. The wind didn't feel as strong. The constant vibration under my feet seemed to dull, like someone had taken a layer of sound out of the world. She raised one hand slightly, just enough movement to draw me in. I remember thinking I should say something. Ask how she got there. Tell her to get back up to the walkway, something practical. But I couldn't say anything. I just kept looking. She smiled. Just enough to feel like it was meant for me, nobody else. The kind of expression you don't question when you see it in the right place. Except we weren't in the right place. She took a step backward, not away from me, toward the edge. There was no railing where she was standing, just open space and water below. I shifted my weight forward without thinking, one step then another. My hand came off the railing. I remember placing my foot closer to the edge, like I needed a better angle to see her, like I was trying to keep her in view as she moved. She took another step back, smiling at me. I didn't feel alarmed. That's the part that's hard to explain later. I didn't feel like anything was wrong. I felt like I just needed to follow. The sound hit before I understood what it was. A single violent strike of metal on metal that cut through everything else on the platform. Then another, then another. The bell. Close enough that I felt it in my chest. And the world snapped back all at once. The wind came rushing in. The machinery noise returned at full volume. The vibration under my boots surged back into place. I grabbed the railing instinctively, my balance shifting as if I'd been leaning too far forward for too long. I looked down again and she was gone. The lower platform was empty. Just wet steel and the dark water moving between the support legs. The bell kept ringing. I turned and saw Daniel Johnson halfway down the walkway, both hands on the rope, pulling it hard and fast over and over again. His face wasn't panicked, it was focused, the same way it would be during any emergency procedure. "Earplugs," he shouted. I didn't move. He pointed directly at me, sharp and direct. "Now," he said. I realized then I could hear singing drifting somewhere over the ocean. I hadn't noticed it until that moment. Daniel slowed the ringing after a few more pulls, then stopped completely. The singing in the distance was gone now. The platform noise filled the space again. He walked up to me, eyes locked on mine, checking something I couldn't see. "You see her?" he asked. I nodded. He glanced over the railing, then back at me. "How close were you?" I don't know. I was just looking," he finished. I nodded again. He studied me for another second, then gave a short, controlled exhale. "All right, well, you're fine," he said. He didn't ask what she looked like, what she did. I think he already knew. Patrick came down from the crane a few minutes later, moving faster than usual. He checked the lower platform, scanned the water, then came back up without saying anything. No one suggested searching further. No one suggested going down after her. Work stopped for maybe 10 minutes, then it resumed. Later in the maintenance room, Daniel sat across from me and finally explained it in plain terms. "Look, they don't come up often," he began. But when they do, you don't wait to be sure. You ring the bell." "Why the bell?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. It's something about the sound. Cuts through whatever they use." "Use for what?" He looked at me like I'd already answered my own question. "To get you over the edge," he said. And I thought back to the way it felt, the quiet, the focus, the complete absence of doubt. "You know, I wasn't scared," I said. "Yeah, you wouldn't be," he replied. He leaned back in his chair, arms resting at his sides. "That's the problem." There had been other incidents before mine. Not all of them ended with someone catching it in time. Daniel told me about a man who'd walked straight off the southern platform during a night shift. No hesitation or struggle. Just stepped forward like he was going somewhere he'd already decided to go. They didn't find him. Another one had been seen climbing down an access ladder that didn't lead anywhere safe, moving slowly, deliberately, like he was following instructions nobody could hear but him. By the time someone reached him, he was gone. In every case where someone stopped it, a bell had been rung. Everyone within range put in their earplugs then. Nobody waited to confirm what they were seeing. "You think you'll recognize it, you won't. Not until it's already working," he said. And I didn't argue. I knew exactly how close I'd been to stepping further out. How easy it would have been to keep going. Rule 4. Always carry green Tic Tacs. This is a short one. Everyone on P4 carried the same small green box, usually tucked into a pocket or inside a jacket, and after a few days I realized wasn't something anyone else forgot or treated casually. Nobody ate them, nobody offered them, nobody explained what they were for. They just made sure they had them. I asked about it once and I got a straight answer. Nobody knows. It's just company policy. And you carry them because you're told to. I figured there was a reason for it, and one day I'd find out. Rule 5. If the platform starts to shake, radio headquarters and shout the code into the water. You know the difference between machinery and something else after a while. Everything on P4 moved. Pumps kicked on and off, lines rattled. The whole structure carried a constant low vibration from the systems running below deck. After a few weeks, it all blended together into something predictable. You stopped noticing it unless something changed. When this started, it wasn't loud. It was deep. A slow, heavy movement that came up through the structure instead of across it. Not a loose panel or a line under pressure. It felt like something pushing against the rig from underneath, like the legs were being tested one at a time. The first time I felt it, I was on the mid-level walkway logging readings. I stopped writing and waited for it to settle, thinking it was just a shift in the sea. But it didn't stop. It rolled through again, stronger this time, enough to make the railing hum under my hand. Before I could say anything, radios came alive all at once. Short calls, no confusion. Everyone already knew. "Control, we've got movement. Lower deck confirms. Mid-level confirms." No one asked what it was. Nobody guessed. They just started the process. I heard Frank's voice cut through the channel, steady and flat. "Get headquarters." The radio operator answered immediately. "Already calling." The shaking continued. Not violent, not enough to throw you off your feet, but constant in a way that didn't belong to anything mechanical. You could feel it in your boots, in your hands, in your chest if you stood still long enough. And then the reply came back over the radio. 6 numbers, no explanation, no repeat. Just 6 digits, spoken once, clear and even. The operator read them back to confirm, then repeated them again, louder this time, so everybody could hear. And that was when people started moving fast. Immediate action. Frank grabbed a megaphone from the emergency rack and handed it to me. "Say it," he said. "Into the water. I didn't ask why. I stepped to the outer railing, lifted the megaphone, and looked down at the water between the support legs. I read the numbers off exactly as I'd heard them.
6, 7, 5, 9, 4, 0.
Once, then again, then a third time louder. The sound of my own voice came back at me off the steel in the water, flattened and distorted by the wind. For a moment, nothing changed. Then the movement stopped. Not gradually, all at once. The vibration cut out so cleanly, it felt like something had been switched off. Nobody spoke for a few seconds, and then the radio operator confirmed it. "Movement has stopped. Over." Frank took the megaphone back from me and hung it on its hook like nothing unusual had just happened. "All right, back to work." And that was it. Later that night, I asked Daniel about it while we were on break. He didn't hesitate. "Well, if it starts, you call it in," he said. "And what happens if you don't?" I asked. He looked at me for a second. "No one's tried." And that wasn't entirely true. A few rotations later, I heard about another platform that had waited too long. The shaking got worse. Not enough to collapse anything, but enough to knock equipment loose, send tools sliding, throw men off balance. By the time they made the call and got the code, it took longer to stop. Long enough that something down there had time to keep pushing. Well, they didn't lose the platform, but they lost 2 men. No one ever explained how. Rule 6. Only wear company-issued life jackets. They're easy to spot. Bright yellow, heavier than they should be, with red stitching along the seams and Presidium printed across the back in black. When you pick one up, it doesn't feel like normal offshore gear. It's thicker, denser, and the inside lining is stiff in a way that doesn't soften with you. If you look closely, you start to notice the details. Small markings worked into the stitching, repeating patterns that don't match anything functional. Not reflective or structural, not decorative either. Just there. They stay on a rack near the emergency stations, lined up and ready, and everyone knows exactly where the nearest one is at all times. You don't wear them during work. You don't walk around with them unless you're assigned to something near the edge or there's a reason to expect trouble. But if anything happens that might put you in the water, you grab one without thinking. Not any vest. One of those. We had a fire on the lower deck about 2 months into my time on P4. Started during a maintenance job. Something small that escalated faster than anyone could shut it down. Flames pushed up through the structure, smoke following right behind it. Thick and black, and fast enough to cut off the access ladder before half the crew below could reach it. Alarms went off, suppression systems kicked in, and the whole platform shifted into emergency mode in seconds. Most of the men made it out, but 3 didn't. They reached the outer edge with nowhere else to go, and they made the same decision at different speeds. The first man went over without a vest. You could tell immediately from the way he hit the water. No resistance, no lift, just a straight drop and a hard impact. He surfaced fast, arms breaking through, trying to orient himself, pulling in air like he'd been holding it too long. He didn't get more than a few seconds. Something hit him from below, fast enough that it didn't look real at first. The surface snapped tight around him, a violent shift in the water that pulled him down and broke apart in the same motion. There was a flash under him, pale against the dark, and then the water churned once and settled. A poor beagle, most likely. That's what Frank said later. There wasn't enough left to argue with him. The second man went in a few seconds after. He had one of the company vests on. He surfaced slower, the vest holding him upright, keeping his head clear. He didn't thrash or shout, just stayed there, breathing hard, arms slightly out to balance himself. And then something moved beneath him. You couldn't see it clearly. Not a shape you could track, just a shift in the water. darker than everything around it. It circled once, wide and slow, came back around again, closer this time, passing directly under him. The man froze. It came around one more time, close enough that the surface dipped under his weight, then stopped. For a few seconds, nothing happened. And then it turned and moved away. He stayed there, untouched, until they got a line down to him and pulled him back up. The third man went in last. He had a vest on too, but it wasn't one of ours. Same general shape, but lighter. No markings or stitching patterns, just standard equipment you'd see anywhere. Well, he hit the water and came up, breathing hard, trying to push himself away from the platform legs. For a moment, looked like he might make it. There was space around him, no immediate movement, no sign of anything below. And then the water changed. It shifted in a way that didn't match the current, like something underneath had decided to move and everything above it followed. He slowed, but not because he chose to, because something under him was holding him in place. He tried to kick, tried to turn, his arms moved, but he was not going anywhere. The water around him tightened just enough to keep him exactly where he was. And then he went under. No struggle, no sound. Just pulled straight down like something had opened beneath him and closed again. The surface smoothed out almost immediately. No blood, no sign, nothing. They got the second man back on deck. Nobody went after the third. Nobody even suggested it. Later, after the fire was out, Frank stood by the rack where the company vests were stored and said what needed to be said. He reminded all of us, if you were anywhere near the water, you wore a Presidium vest. Well, I still work on P4. Same rotation and crew, more or less. Men come and go, but the numbers stay the same. 27. Always seems to settle back to that no matter who leaves or why. The job hasn't changed. Same noise and steel. Same wind coming off the water, hard enough to cut through anything if you stand out in it too long. Same routines and shacks. Same long stretches where nothing happens and everything feels controlled. And I still like it out here. I like the structure. I like knowing what I'm doing from the moment I wake up to the moment I go back to the bunk. There's no guesswork to the work itself. And even with all that has happened, I still like the ocean. But I do follow the rules now without thinking about them. No exceptions. You get used to it. That's how everything runs out there. You follow what's been proven and you ignore what doesn't matter. And you don't test anything you don't understand. At night, when the shifts slow down and the platform quiets, just enough to hear the water moving under the structure, I still find myself looking down between the legs. Same dark surface, same slow movement. Nothing visible. The ocean always looks empty, but it never is.